When did you formally let go of your career as a chemical engineer, process engineer?
That was when I was challenged to do full-time ministry in my church. And of course, I dove into the deep end with that move because I had no idea what it was like working in church.
A question that comes up often because when you take your foot out of the old comfortable place that you were, there's a letting go. There's a releasing that occurs as you then move forward into your new direction. And how did you deal with that? I mean, was there some trepidation? Was there some concern or fear? I hear you, Lord, but is this a crazy move?
I can assure you it was 100% of trepidation, and it's worse.
Really happy to have Justin Chan with me here on Titans of Transition. Hey, Justin.
Hi.
Justin is a worship guitarist. I'm kind of on a roll here with doing interviews for musicians and talking about their transition stories and their lessons learned. I came across Justin because I play guitar in my church as well and follow a number of different people on YouTube, and I just really appreciated his work and his spirit. So he'll be joining us from Singapore. Justin, why don't you tell us just a little bit about what you currently do? Tell us a little bit about Singapore and life in Singapore.
Sure, Joe. Hi, Joe, and hi, everyone on this podcast. I'm Justin. I'm from Singapore. Singapore is a tiny island that is at the very bottom of Malaysia. So if you know where Malaysia is, that V-shaped kind of like a peninsula, it's right at the bottom. You can't even see it, on a regular scale map. You gotta like scale down and see, oh, there's a tiny island right there. And Singapore is a city-state. It's very much a metropolis. It's there's no such thing as countryside living here. So all of us live in dense, high-density, high-rise apartments, and because of that, we're all maybe a bit high-strung, a bit more stressed out. And as you could possibly tell, I don't speak Chinese, even though I look like I'm Chinese. My Chinese is terrible. And that's probably characteristic of some of us here. There's a minority of us here who quite, quote-unquote, westernized in our music choices, in our life choices. So my favorite books are, I can name Western authors and Western music as my favorite media bits. Very little Chinese stuff, negligible. And I am currently at the Methodist School of Music. That's my day job. So YouTube is not my full-time thing, even though I wish it were. My YouTube channel is Electric Guitarist doing worship ministry. And that is an outflow from my day job in the Methodist School of Music. And that is I curate, design, implement training programs for church musician teams. So if anyone needs to do band dynamics, I'm the guy they call. If anyone wants to plan a course on how to integrate the electric guitar into a worship team, I'm the guy that they would call. And the Methodist School of Music is comprised of basically two arms. There's the general music arm, which they teach piano, violin, ABRSM, which is like the standard qualification body for music. Then you've got the worship music side, which is me and my department and my colleagues, and we all are involved in some way or form of training the church in Singapore. Even though there's Methodist in the name, we cater to any church in Singapore who wants to level up their worship ministry.
Oh, that's great. I'm sure we have people joining us who may not be that familiar with church music and church ministry. My last interview with John Cordy, we touched on it a little bit, and I was surprised, happily, but surprised that he had spent some time playing in church as well. So we may want to take some time and later on in this podcast and talk about the differences and the similarities in playing in a group in a church versus playing in sort of a normal secular kind of a band or something like that. And you've played in bands too. It's not like you haven't done that as well. But the main focus of this podcast is really talking about life and career transitions. So why don't we start off, if it's okay, and kind of get a sense on how you landed in this current role at this music school and, doing what you're doing.
It's a long and windy road, and thanks to Joe.
Sounds like a Paul McCartney song, Long and Winding Road.
The second you said that, I thought of that song too. So yes. It is a long and windy road, but the Cliff Notes version and hopefully the 5-minute version of the story is that I arrived here as a result of a few key events in my life that pushed me towards number one, full-time ministry, and number two, music in ministry specifically. All along, as I was growing up, my dream was to become the next rock star, rock musician, and I always dreamt, and even now I still dream of playing on stage in a band and making music. And
So just to interrupt you just a second, what, like Joe Satriani and others like that?
Oh man, I was convinced I was going to be the next John Petrucci
Oh man,
in an
Dream
Asian Dream
Theater?
Theater. Yeah,
Yeah.
I was actually in a Dream Theater cover band at one point in time, and I was and that was pre YouTube and pre recording days, so like there's like almost zero evidence of me ever having done that. Could be a good thing. I had to take all the songs and slow it down by like to 15%. Yeah, so I had childhood dreams of being a rock star and musician, and as I was growing up and being in an Asian household, the general advice that my parents were comfortable with and the trajectory that they were comfortable with was if I could get a normal day job and work on music as a side. And that was the life plan, to get a degree, to get an undergraduate in something, and then work at music on the side. But something happened getting the full-time day job, and that was in Singapore. Before we go to higher education, all Singaporean males have to serve 2 years in national service. And between junior college and university, there is, or at least between the two phases of education, there's like a 6-month gap between when you end school and when you start national service. And for me, I was due to enter national service, but I still had a 6-month kind of like lag time of like just downtime. I was totally free. During that time, my church friends who they were part of an organization called Singapore Youth for Christ. And Singapore Youth for Christ is a parachurch organization. They are not affiliated with any church, but they are comprised of staff and volunteers whose main goal is to do outreach to youth and youth programs. And Youth for Christ, there are basically two ways that they run programs. There's the school-based ministries, which they do direct outreach in the schools, and then they've got interest-based outreach, which is they've got different groups that cater to different like ministry points. So, for example, the sports ministry, so they get sporty people to come in. I was invited to attend a program at the performing arts ministry. So it's they call it Project Serve. It's a 3 to 6 month program where you take on, it's like an internship. You go in and you are treated and you perform as at the same duties as a full-time staff would at at Singapore Youth for Christ. And so for 3 to 6 months, I ended up staying there for the whole 6-month duration. I did a stint there in Project Serve, and basically the main goal of that program, the main highlight, I should say, is that they plan and organize an evangelistic concert using radio songs, and they craft a gospel message based on the radio songs. And so that was my first exposure to seeing that music can be used for purposes other than self-expression and creative expression. And I was, number one, blown away by that connection between music. And I think at that point in time, seeds were being sown in my heart to start desiring more of this kind of meaningful connections and this kind of meaningful work, because I started to see that music was more than just self-expression, more than just cutting your own albums and making it big.
So Justin, going into this gap period leading up to your internship with Youth for Christ, did you have some career direction in mind at that time?
Yes, because actually by that time I already had a degree. My path was slightly inverted. Most people go to junior college, then army. And so before going to army, and actually before going to Youth for Christ, I already had a degree in chemical engineering and process technology. So actually when you mentioned pharmaceuticals and being an analytical chemist, I can totally relate, because I was in pharmaceutical manufacturing for 2 years, as part of the day job, as it were. So
there you go. Okay, let's get back on track. You had done this internship and you felt like it really resonated with you at that point in time. Did I read that right?
Yes. In a nutshell, that happened. That was the aha moment where I could see that music could be meaningfully used, and it gave me a sense of deeper purpose that I was engaging in not just creative expression, but creative expression with a purpose, if you know what I mean. That was a Youth for Christ. And that was part one, actually. Part two of the story is during my national service, I actually got injured. Both my wrists have genetically weak ligaments. So these ligaments, the central ligament inside these wrists, they will tear, and they were torn during my time in national service. It was so injured. They were so badly injured that my technique was basically erased. All those years that I spent, playing up dream theater chops, it was gone. I couldn't play guitar. It was 1% of the ability that I had. That was that process of being broken down, and it forced me to examine my outlook in life. And basically, I felt that the question was asked to me, who am I without music, or who am I without a guitar? If God would take away the guitar from me, how would I survive? Would I survive? And the honest answer at that point in time when it first happened was that I felt lost, and I felt that it was all doom and gloom for quite a while, actually. And by God's grace, he healed my wrists. I can't play as fast as that anymore, but during that process of being broken down and relearning my technique, that was the opportunity for me to look at what else God has given me and has given me to do, and to explore those options. And during that phase, and actually these events occurred almost back to back, because I did my internship at Youth for Christ, then I went into army, and then got injured. So that was this whole period of, okay, if everything's going to be stripped down, what else can I do? I was challenged to go to church, and I obeyed whatever prompting was given to me. And that was exploring, that was the period exploring, okay, if I'm not going to be a musician, maybe I could be a pastor. And as long story short, it became quite clear that I was better suited to work in other areas of ministry other than being a pastor in the Methodist Church in Singapore. And because of that, I was freed up to enter seminary. So I did 3 years of seminary. I got a theological degree, a Master's of Divinity. And during that time, I interned at the Methodist School of Music, because I have a field education requirement to fulfill as part of my degree. And that was the time that my current boss gave me the opportunity to teach courses there. She gave me free reign to design and teach. I believe it was like 3 to 4 Saturdays of electric guitar workshop. And of course, that was something that we've compiled and packaged it now at the Methodist School of Music. But back then, it was the first time they ever did that in that current format anyway. And I felt, wow, this is something, I felt at home. I felt this is like something that really marries my interest and passion in music, my alignment with wanting to do this for purpose and for a greater purpose. And I don't have to play as fast as John Petrucci to serve in this capacity. And so, in a nutshell, this is where I felt like the job fit right like a glove. My boss really wanted me there. There were no obstructions to getting in. No one was telling me that this was a bad idea. And everyone who saw that move said that, yeah, this is totally what Justin would do. And
so you had some I'll call it external validation.
Yes. So when
this
my
was a good place for you.
Yeah, well, my classmates were all, they were graduating, they were going back to the churches to work as full-time staff or to go on to become ordained pastors. They look at me and with my path into Methodist School of Music, and they said, yeah, that's totally what you should be doing. Like, don't let us be the pastors. We need more people like you to go into this, because there's only one of you. There's like so many of us.
Right. So when did you formally let go of your career as a chemical engineer, process engineer?
That was when I was challenged to do full-time ministry in my church. I felt that prompting to serve in my church, even though I didn't know exactly what that would entail. And of course, I dove into the deep end with that move, because I had no idea what it was like working in church. And that really opened my eyes, and in good and bad ways, I suppose.
Yeah, well, it's a question that comes up often, because people, they sort of keep one foot in both worlds, which isn't a bad thing as you sort of test the waters. But when you take your foot out of the old comfortable place that you were, when maybe you were making a good salary, you know what it takes to be successful, and there's a letting go, there's a releasing that occurs as you then move forward into your new direction. So sometimes that can be a big challenge. How did you deal with that? I mean, was there some trepidation? Was there some concern or fear? I hear you, Lord, but is this a crazy move?
I can assure you it was 100% trepidation, and it's worse as an Asian kid in an Asian household. But what prompted me to obey the call, to take up the challenge was, number one, I felt the burden to do a lot more in church and with a lot more of my time than I could afford as part-time as an engineer. And number two, there were people who provided support and gave me that assurance that they would support me going to church. And the key person was my then girlfriend, now my wife. Back then, even before we started the courtship season, even like the day that I told her that I wanted to get serious with her, I told her that I was eventually going to full-time ministry, and are you okay with that? And it was okay. If you're not okay with it, you have the opportunity to walk away.
Tell me now.
She didn't walk away, and she said that she would support me, and she even incorporated that she would support me in full-time ministry, even in our wedding vows, and that was that to this day that is still like the number one, like it's like the number one core memory for me. And it still gives me that drive each and every day that I'm doing this on this crazy journey of full-time ministry.
Together. And I will drop in the show notes a link to your video that prompted me actually to reach out to you to request an interview with you, Justin, where you honored your wife and thanked her for her support. That was very touching. That kind of partnership is wonderful. And I can speak for myself kind of in the retirement years and how many years I put my wife through all kinds of crazy situations, changing jobs and moving across our country, the U.S. And so having that partnership is really valuable, that consideration as well. So there was kind of a aha moment that you exposed, that there was an epiphany where you said, wow, this is really good. I really like this. This is it. And then moving forward from that, pretty much full steam ahead, I guess, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's right.
So what can we pivot now and talk about what's life like for you? So what's your typical day? What does it look like? Obviously, if you're working in the church, there is a schedule every week. I know I'm on the worship team of my church, so, I work on the music leading up to rehearsal times, and of course there's the actual worship service or services on Sunday mornings. So as someone who's part of that or leading that, you have additional requirements to get ahead of things. And I know from my background, but others may not know what your day is like. And then if you can bring in this YouTube part, because you're putting out a lot of material to serve other worship musicians and good worship guitarists, electric guitarists as well. So tell us a little bit about your job and what that's like, and then bring in the whole YouTube thing and,
Sure.
and what you bring.
Okay. Work in Methodist School music is seasonal. It depends on quite a few things. Number one, the seasons of the liturgical calendar. Normally, we have concerts that we plan and execute at various churches. So we have an Advent concert. We have a Christmas concert, we have a Lent concert, and we have like a Good Friday, Easter sort of like concert. So those concerts can appear in various forms. The one that is most prominent is we have a volunteer choir to perform at those concerts. And I say concert, but it's really like a themed service. And even though I said that my job description is to design, curate, and implement band training, I'm very much involved in the other side. My music performance side can be in these concerts, because I will play guitar for these concerts. I will arrange some music for these concerts. So those are for the key events. But the day-to-day job, when inquiry from church comes in, let's say a church wants to do band training, I would have to plan out when is the best time for me to go in and sit in with their rehearsals, number one, sit in with their band meetings, if they do have band meetings outside of rehearsals. And that can take up several Saturdays at a go. And so there was a period, for some reason, a lot of churches are very free and like toward the end of the year, like October. So there was one October, November where every single Saturday I was in either one or two churches, working hand in hand with them. So I like to work with specialty training. So I try not to do like generic training. So I have to cater specifically to that church. And so that's a lot of hand holding. There's a lot of direct involvement with the church. So I would sit in with their rehearsal. I would then teach and implement some band training techniques with that particular worship team or the worship ministry, depending on whether they want a whole ministry-wide thing or they just want band tuition for one band, as it were. And then I would watch their worship service. Right now, because of the pandemic, every church has the ability to record their services. And so I would review the footage and I'll watch or take notes, and I'll have a post-Sunday meeting with the band to tell them what they did right or they did wrong, what can they improve. And that whole process from pre-band meeting to post-Sunday meeting can be 4 or 5 Saturdays for one church. And so there are times I've had 2 or 3 churches are working concurrently, and that takes up a lot of weekends. Aside from that, we also have some courses that we run independent of like this kind of training. So we have like a course we would run every last Saturday of the month for 6 months, and we call that the Certificate in Christian Worship. And I would take the musician track of training the bands there. So every last Saturday of the month, I've got one class that I would teach. And of course, if any church wants to do a seminar, they want to do a weekend of training, I would avail myself to teach at that church.
So it's very much like a consultancy in a way.
Yes, you could say that. So
yeah, and it's not just the face-to-face time, but like any other consultancy, you have to do your research to understand where they are.
Oh yeah.
You know,
what
their as is and what their to be is.
Pretty much.
Lingo, right?
Indeed. And how YouTube fits into all of this is during the pandemic, a lot of the audio and video production skills were learned right then, because when we suddenly couldn't meet up face to face, I had to pivot and to work entirely to produce digital content like video seminars, Zoom conferences. And so a lot of these skills of what does good video look like, how does good audio sound like,
how do you mix it live?
In fact, the early days of the pandemic when we had to do like total lockdown in Singapore, I was producing worship music videos for church, at least 2 to 3 a week. And so I had to collate everyone's home recordings. I had to mix the audio and get a good mix out of that. So mixing, mastering, the whole engineering process. And then after that, produce the video where they would film themselves at home and stitching it together. And then, and right then and then I learned video editing.
So some of these were all stitched together. They weren't like just the worship team in the room with masks or something.
We couldn't
recorded. You had to piece these together.
Yeah, we couldn't even go into church. So we.
Oh my gosh! What a challenge.
Yeah, so we got a chance to see what everyone's houses look like, or what everyone's bedroom looked like for a period. And that season really boosted my video and audio production skills. And I thought, well, this might be a time to really take my channel seriously. And I've always wanted to be an educational channel. I wanted to teach, and one of the outlets where I can do anything I want, and for anything I wanted to talk about, deep dive into subjects that would be considered too nerdy to do live, I can do it on YouTube. And I guess I'm thankful that there is an audience, that people are watching and can geek out with me with my gear and my tech stuff. And I've tried to do technique stuff as well, like guitar technique stuff, but I just haven't had the time to really write out tabs and to like go through the exercise. I would really want to do that. I don't have that. Yeah.
Well, in your situation, since you are working at the school, I mean, I'm producing course and curriculum and delivering and doing consulting. It's a different mix than some guitarists on YouTube, where it's really more about monetization and that sort of their full-time job, so they can justify running tabs and other things. You might want to, but it's a lot of work.
It is. Yeah.
It's interesting. And when I asked the question at the very beginning of this segment, I completely misspoke and said, going into the church, but of course you're at the school. And so the work you're doing at your own church is voluntary, I imagine.
Yes. My worship leading and
so you have that too.
Voluntary. Yes, I've got that too. And the fun thing about YouTube, I guess, is that because I'm deep diving into all this gear, I'm able to take some of this deep diving and implement it in church. So I didn't get, I wouldn't have had a chance to use Ableton Live on stage if not for the if not for me having to sit down and figure out, okay, how am I going to use my Helix as an Ableton live controller, and then research, figure out, then come out with the script, and then film it, teach it, and then get it recorded. It's teaching myself first, I think, with YouTube. So YouTube, I guess it's cathartic in that I get to teach what I want to teach, but it's also I get to train myself in the things that I talk about.
Yes, absolutely. Because you have in mind you want to bring this out, and so in order to bring it out, you have to do your preparation for those episodes. Or it can be, I'm going to learn this, and I'm going to bring my YouTube audience along my journey.
Yeah.
What I discover and what works in that context. So, in terms of the transitions, then, I think we got a little bit about your YouTube channel, and I will put in the notes, obviously, links to that, because I think it's a great resource for those who are listening, who are on worship teams, who are leading worship. There's a lot of great insights, and for just general musicians and guitarists who are interested in certain types of gear. I know you spend a lot of time with the Helix platform, which is very popular. So people probably find you just doing searches on those devices, and it's great content. But in terms of the transitions you've gone through, what kind of lessons have come out? If you were going to, this is my advice to your younger self question. If you were to turn the clock back, Justin, based upon the paths that you've gone on and the transitions you've made, what advice would you have to others?
I think the number one advice I would give to at least people considering full-time ministry and full-time music ministry is that be prepared that music is only one part of the equation. And I say that because it's a bit of a rude shock to you take on a job or you take on a position and suddenly realize that you've got to not just, I guess, perform your role as a musician or consultant, but also you got to balance budgets, you need to write reports, you need to defend your decisions regarding why you bought equipment A versus equipment B, all this, as you would call it, red tape. Sooner we embrace that notion that ministry is more than just music. Ministry is also administration. It's also having to be faithful in these things. It depends on the situation you're in and depends on the context you're in. The sooner you realize that there is a level of administration to embrace, not just plow through or not just like, I have to just survive this. If you embrace it and if you try to internalize and get it as part of your internal system, that will go down a lot faster and a lot easier. You won't have those days where you bang your head on the wall saying, why do I have to balance budgets, or like, why do I need to provide 3 quotations, or like, and do that kind of head banging when I'm called to be a musician, or I'm called to be someone to bless the congregation with. You are blessing people.
Embrace that you're part of the overall team of this organization and not just in this one area. Other things that come to mind? We talked a little bit about knowing that you were making the right move, and how did you know?
I think there are 2 factors to also. So some of the advice also is to open your eyes to both external and internal confirmations. The internal confirmation, of course, is after your prayer, after your devotion with the Lord, your quiet time. Where do you sense him leading you towards? Sometimes his voice isn't easy to discern with all the background clamor going around. The external validation is also quite important. If you feel that you're going in a certain direction and everyone says that that's a bad idea, it probably is a bad idea. As much as we try to claim the verse, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. That's not what the verse is trying to tell you. So external confirmation is an important thing. I would have probably listened to my closer friends when they told me that maybe being a pastor wasn't a good fit for you. And maybe my process would have been faster if I had heeded that advice, because it wasn't just one person. It was a couple of people really telling that to me, not just my pastor in charge, but my pastor overseeing me and a few of my colleagues who were in the same church office. And the more that added up, I thought it was just, it was just opposition. I thought it was just, why are they
fighting me?
Yeah, I got to prove them wrong, and maybe there is wisdom in listening to that kind of feedback and that kind of like external non-confirmation, as it were.
I think this is really, I appreciate transparency, because I think oftentimes people get a little stuck here, because what's not being said is that you couldn't be skilled in certain aspects of a role. You could be very skilled in it, right? People can get very confused by this situation and get the ability overlapping with the concept of a gift, right? They're not the same.
Mm.
I mean, in my experience, having gifting in a certain area will make it maybe easier for you to then develop the skills, but they're not the same. And you can be very successful as you lean into your skill set. When I was heading IT, and I did well, but it wasn't really the technology part of the job that lit me up, as I'm sure that you probably have a similar analogy. It was other things. It was really dealing with people. It was managing change. Those were really more the gifts, and gifts don't necessarily fall within a particular job description. So it may not be that you have the confirmation to becoming a pastor, but certain aspects of what's important in being a pastor, being a shepherd, being an encourager, I see those in you. I see them in the content in your YouTube videos and in your heart. So I'm sure they're there. That doesn't mean those giftings can't be used in a completely different setting.
Mm. Yes, you're right.
And I
Absolutely
think we have this paradigm of job and role. This is part of the journey, and I think this is what makes it a little bit tough at times for us to discern. And as you said, you get that internal confirmation through the Spirit. We get that internal confirmation in our hearts. But it really is looking at skills, looking at gifting, looking at our passions, which really is kind of our response. We say, this is the right place. I can get excited about this.
May I share something about
please.
more about internal confirmation? Sometimes I think we try to hear a distinct voice of God saying, you must do this. And I think the more mature we've become, I think the more God wants us to make responsible choices for ourselves. In that sometimes He doesn't specifically say you are going to do this, but He lets you be aware and makes you cognizant of you have these skills, these giftings. I want you to make a responsible choice to do something that honors me. And I think too many of us wait for the audible voice of God when God is trying to tell us, like, everything that you do for me can be used for my glory. So just do one thing. Just pick something and run with it. And so, another piece of advice I would give my younger self, that is, don't wait too long on the Lord. Sometimes He wants you to make a decision for yourself.
Yeah. I years ago, I was engaged with a Christian coach, and I was struggling over a decision, and he pointed me to a reference of an author who basically was struggling with making a choice. And she actually came to the point where she just said and prayed, God, just stop me if this is wrong, because I'm not hearing anything clearly, but I'm being drawn towards it, rather than the other way around. To your point, waiting for the blinding light. We've already been told through Scripture, we've been given general guidance, and we can test our direction against what's already been revealed to us. So we have that as a guide too. One of the recurring themes, Justin, that's come through many of my conversations is this comfort zone challenge, where we're kind of wired for safety, and we may be drawn, our heart may be pulling us forward. We may be feeling a call, but we may pause. We may overanalyze. We may get into paralysis by analysis because we're so afraid of making a mistake, or so afraid of what the other voices around us would say, that we don't take that kind of a leap. And we don't trust that it'll be okay. You can always readjust if it isn't quite right. We're just afraid of leaving that comfort zone at times. So anyway, I'll get off my stump.
Well, and to quickly draw back Scripture, Moses was 80 years old when God called him to do something different with his life. The biggest career switch, 80 years old. And
lately with Moses, I've thought about another piece of advice I've heard is, get off the outcome and focus more on, as you say, step out and do it. Because, Moses's ultimate outcome was he wanted to enter the promised land. It never happened, and think about how revered he was, in the Jewish faith and as Christians as well. But he never entered. That was something that he didn't get to do. But in so many other ways, he did what he needed to be doing. So anyway, that's great. I would like to be able to sort of pivot and just wrap up a little bit more about how people can reach you. Do you have any future projects or things you're working on you think might be of interest? So this is your time.
Sure, sure. You can find me at All About Worship Guitar. That's the handle is at All About Worship Guitar, all spelled in one phrase, no special symbols whatsoever. I'm very thankful that no one else has gotten that handle yet. So I'm quite easy to find on social media. It's All About Worship Guitar on YouTube, Instagram, and I believe Facebook too. I'm quite negligent about Facebook stuff because it's just too many platforms to consider. But with YouTube, I am in this phase of doing other kinds of gear review, not just on Helix. So Helix has been one major, it's the biggest draw of my channel, I suppose. But I've been drawn to look at other kinds of more budget-friendly kind of gear, and hopefully I can come up with some content that aligns with people's interest in finding gear options of a certain price point. That's ideas in the pipeline. I also do want to have some more technique videos. So I am working in the pipeline to, one of the videos that I'm really excited about is how to play acoustic guitar well. Because I don't know about you guys in the US, but in Singapore and in Singaporean churches, every church guitarist has like this notion of like, or you must have like, choose one of four strumming patterns to insert into a song, and sometimes that doesn't work. Most of the time it doesn't work. So I do want to create a series of like videos of demonstrating how do you develop the instinct to groove with the song on your acoustic guitar. That's a pipeline project. I'm also involved in producing music. Because of the pandemic, I've had the opportunity to really dig deep and hone my engineering chops. So I have a couple of EPs up on my Spotify profile. So if you search for, I think I might give you the link to put in the show notes
Sure.
description. But I'm on Spotify, I'm on Apple Music, I believe, and it's basically music that I've really wanted. Like, it's 20 years too late, I guess. I've always wanted to do my own music and never had a chance to. So with the pandemic and learning how to do it, I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to put out music that I've wanted to put out. And my burden has always been to present hymns in a more contemporary light. And so I have reharmonized a lot of hymns and hymn texts, basically taking a hymn text that no one's done before, no one's sung, put a tune to. I put a tune to that, and that's part of my music projects, and I've got a few more.
So you put different melodies under these hymn texts?
Yes. So there are, of course, I don't touch the famous ones. The famous ones, everyone,
Sure.
Everyone has an opinion. Like you cannot touch Amazing Grace, or unless you're Chris Tomlin, but I'm not. So I do have reharmonized hymns, and it's a fun way to answer the question: how do I play a hymn with a full band? And that was that's a burden in my church, at least in my church context. Like whenever a band encounters a hymn, they go like, "Oh, just let the pianist play it. Just let the organist play it. We don't need to play it." No, man, everyone can play in a hymn. So that's my attempt to modernize and to show people, hey, you guys can actually play a hymn in a rock band format, and that's personal project of mine.
Yeah, that can be a little risky at times. Church that I was at in California, our worship leader, Nancy, back in the day, everyone was playing Lord, I Lift Your Name on High. Every church was playing that, right? And the same way, constantly. And we did one Sunday, without telling the senior pastor, we did that song, 4 verses, and each verse was a different style. We did the traditional style first. Then we switched to, I think, country. I think we did jazz and then reggae or something like that. And it was so much fun for the musicians. I don't know how much the senior pastor appreciated it, but it was a blast. Of course, you have to have people who can do that. And she and some of the musicians, I was just pleased to be on the stage with them and be able to.
Is there a recording of this? I
hope
there's a recording I could see.
I don't think so. I mean, I don't think I could get to it.
I mean, the gears I might anyway. That's my homework later on.
This has been so much fun talking to you, Justin. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. I really appreciate it. And folks, please do check those links out and follow up with Justin if you have an interest. Appreciate your heart, brother.
Thank you, Joe.
And let's stay in touch.
Let's do. God bless you.
Hey, thanks for joining me today on Titans of Transition. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Please check the show notes for additional information.